And before I pass it on to our moderator, Kirsten Sweeney, for the afternoon, I would like to give a land acknowledgement. I would like to take this time to acknowledge that wherever we are currently located on Turtle Island, otherwise known as North America, we are on occupied territory. A.R.T. New York's membership in the 5 boroughs of New York City operates on the unceded ancestral land of the Lenape, Wappinger, Canarsie, Rockaway, and Matinecock communities. I want to honor and celebrate all of these Indigenous communities, their elders past and present, as well as future generations. I also want to take this time to acknowledge that after there was stolen land, there were stolen people. I want to honor the generations of displaced and enslaved people that built and continue to build the country that we occupy today. Since we are gathered today in virtual space, let's also take a moment to consider the legacies of colonization embedded within the technologies, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many Indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the art we make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to changing climates that disproportionately affect Indigenous peoples worldwide. I invite you to join me in acknowledging all of this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good of this time, and for each of us to consider our roles in recolonization, reconciliation, decolonization, anti-racism, and allyship. Thank you so much. The virtual part of that land acknowledgement was written by Adrian Wong of Spiderweb Show in Ontario, Canada. To learn more about whose land you're on, we're going to provide a link in the chat, and to call attention to the actions that we all can take beyond just a land acknowledgement. We will also provide another resource in the chat for you to take a look at. So without further ado, I would like to pass it on to Kirsten Sweeney, your moderator for this afternoon.
Thank you, Ash. Hi, everyone. This is Kirsten speaking. I am a person with sort of light olive skin. My dark brown hair is tied back in a ponytail right now. I'm wearing sort of rounded glasses with thick red plastic frames, and I've got a sort of dark green sweater on. And yeah, so my name is Kirsten Sweeney. I use she or they pronouns. Some of you might remember me from when I was previously the Education and Access Coordinator at A.R.T. New York. I'm still a member of A.R.T. New York's Disability Advisory Council, which is the role I am filling here today. I also work as the Accessibility and Inclusion Manager at Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. So yeah, we are here today to talk about access service providers and to hear from some folks who utilize different types of access services when they attend theater performances, to hear about their experiences, what works for them, that doesn't, and what they're looking for from a quality performance. So I will invite our 3 panelists to turn on their cameras and come on screen. We've got Frank Dattolo, Tina Childress, and Krystal Allen here with us today. So we'll give everyone a moment to get spotlit, and then we will get started. Great. All right. Hi, everyone.
This is Frank.
So nice to see everyone's faces. So I'd love to just start with sort of a general introduction. So I'll call on each of you individually, just ask you to introduce yourself, share your name, your pronouns, if you want to share those, a brief visual description of yourself, and then also just a short introduction to what access services you use when you attend theater. So why don't I start with Frank?
Hello, everyone. My name is Frank Dattolo. My pronouns or he, him, his. My visual description, I'm wearing a black shirt. I have dark blackish brown hair. I'm wearing my reading glasses, and I have a mustache. Behind me is a simple whiteboard. I happen to be in my office at the moment at the Lexington School for the Deaf here in Queens, New York. Specifically, East Elmhurst, Queens, New York. Very close to LaGuardia Airport, right across this road. And this area is originally unceded land of the Lenape. And it's very nice to see all of you. I'm looking forward to our discussion this afternoon. And I hope to expand some horizons about access. So, good. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Frank. This is Kirsten speaking. I will pass it over next to Tina.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tina Childress. I live in Illinois, south of the state of Chicago. I'm actually in central Illinois, and I feel really honored to be part of this panel this afternoon. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am a Filipina female with brown skin, brown eyes, wearing colorful half-rimmed glasses, and I have shoulder-length black hair streaked with gray, which I like to call ombre. I am wearing a black sweater top, and there are yellow and brown wide vertical stripes on the wall behind me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tina. And last but not least, I'll pass it over to Krystal to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. And thank you for having me participate today. I'm really excited for what is going to be shared. I'm Krystal Allen, and my pronouns are she and her. I am in Newark, New Jersey currently, and I am wearing from the waist up I guess you could say a royal blue color top with a draped necklace that has silver patterned stringed beads and studded earrings, a curly ponytail, and a nice smile. I'm a rich chocolate brown complexion. I am legally blind, and I have been for 22 years coming this August. And some access technology pieces I like to use when attending theater are audio descriptive devices if they're available, and some of my apps that are on my iPhone, some that are called IRA, AIRA, or Be My Eyes, and sometimes friends who I'm with.
Great. This is Kirsten. Thank you all for sharing a little bit about yourselves. For our conversation today, I'm not really going to be directing questions to any specific person. Each question is just sort of open for any of you to respond to as you feel like it. So our first question, I just love to sort of open with hearing a little bit about when you are going to the theater. How do you decide what to see? What sort of factors into your decision about what shows you want to see? Anyone can sort of kick us off with this. Yeah, Tina.
So I also typed in the chat box. I guess I forgot to mention why I'm part of this panel. I am also a late deafened adult, and I use, spoken English or ASL depending on the situation that I'm in. So when it comes to, what I do when I want to access theater, I really do use a variety of access services. It really depends on the venue, what the available accommodations are, and the type of performance. So for me, for musical theater, which is my love, I'm so proud that I have a daughter that's actually majoring in theater right now. And so I get to see her on stage. So for musical theater, I prefer captions. And for straight plays and anything that's interactive with, any kind of conversations with the audience, I prefer ASL interpreters. I do prefer my captions to be open caption, so I don't have to hold anything. And I prefer my ASL interpreters on stage, or at least pretty close to the stage, so I'm not having to look to the left and to the right and to the left and to the right to access their viewing. I also really appreciate venues that have designated accessible seating. And for last minute requests on my part, or maybe for very small venues, I have also used a PDF of the script, which I then download to my phone. And then I have like a monopod, kind of like a selfie stick. And I mount my phone on that selfie stick. I put my phone into dark mode, so I'm not lighting up the whole theater. And I can follow along pretty well if I have a script that way, as long as the script is kind of, not like a copy of a book or something like that. I appreciate true digital scripts where I can, make things bigger or smaller, and the page will reset itself depending on how big the text is. So I really do use a variety of things. I guess I would also say I will use an assistive listening device if I know that all of the actors are going to have a microphone, because we know that if they don't have a microphone, it's not going to come through the assistive listening device, and it's not going to be a big help. And that's for me as someone that can hear relatively well with my devices. I know assistive listening devices don't work for all people, especially for people that are completely deaf. It doesn't matter how loud you make it, it's not going to be useful. So those are the options that I use.
I would like to also answer. This is Krystal. I don't know if any of the audience members are visually impaired, so I'll just announce myself each time I respond. Some ways in which I decide what I will attend. I like Broadway plays. So it's really based on a few things: the description of the event, who's participating, and if I'm not sure of the ADA accommodations, I will call in advance to find out what is offered. If I'm going to a movie theater, I'll just go straight to the customer service desk and I'll ask for audio descriptive devices. Sometimes when some venues don't even know what audio description is, I may have to use my own devices through different apps that I've installed in my phone. And sometimes, many times, I may have to just go without and just try to follow along and make my own imaginary visualizations of what I think could be the action that's taking place, because with my vision in my left eye, I just see hand motion and light. In my right eye, I see out of my peripheral. And over the years, my vision has declined. So the way that I attend and engage with theater events or any type of performing arts has changed over the years. I used to be able to try to use some of my vision maybe 15 years ago. And now a lot of my engagement relies on listening or description. So, and then it's always a plus if most theater venues will have the ADA accommodations desk, or that they have some knowledge about what could be helpful for all attendees with different disabilities. But unfortunately, there's still not many options when going to different venues. So that's pretty much how I decide. If I know that there won't be any accommodations in place, but I still would like to find out what's going to happen, and if I'll find it entertaining, I'll still go I won't boycott it, but I will make a suggestion to whoever might be the manager on site about having some available ADA devices, whether it's audio description or if it might be an opportunity for a performing ASL interpreter or what have you. So I don't just try to find out if it could be something accommodating just for my disability, but for others, because people are going to performing arts experiences every day.
Yeah, I love that allyship, Krystal. That's great. Frank, do you have anything you want to share about how you decide what sort of shows to go to?
Yeah, sure. Before I go forward, I want to let you know I have bilateral profound deafness in both ears, just to convey that. My preferred access, let me just give you a little background first. I was a theater major myself. I was in professional theater company, National Theater of the Deaf. And then I went into education. I went into the education field. I was still involved in theater even when I transitioned to education. So I have a background in theater. And so when it comes to access, when I want to see theater, it's an important question to ask about access. I prefer ASL interpreters for a show for several reasons. I've experienced theater with open captions, and I do have some reservations about that for myself. For me, ASL is very dynamic language in and of itself, and it has its own shape and dynamics, and I consider it my first language. So it's like my native tongue is ASL, or my fingers. And that's where I connect. To get the message through ASL is easier for me. To get it through open captioning, sometimes I'm missing the content a little bit. Because ASL is my native language, therefore, if I'm watching something in captioning, it's almost like a double translation for me. It's my second language. I'm taking it in English and I understand it, but in my head, I'm also simultaneously translating that into ASL and trying to get the whole story. I translate that in my head. I do like musicals. I like straight plays as well. Experimental theater. I like to read theater too. So it's varied. I'm really interested in the stories and the messages. Like, why is that show being produced? Why is it on the stage? Is it something I'm interested in? Is the topic I'm familiar with? Is it something new? Is it something that's going to raise an issue or have something I can connect to? And, there's many reasons why I would go to the theater, not just because it's accessible. That's how I would pick a show. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Great. This is Kirsten. Thank you, Frank. All of you, super helpful things to sort of understand what it is you're thinking about when you go to the theater. And I'm wondering now, some of you touched on this a little bit, but if you want to share a little bit more in detail, like how would you define like a successful experience with an accessible performance? And if you want to speak about a specific experience, you can, or if you just want to speak generally, that's fine too. And then also on the flip side of that, what makes an experience with an accessible performance potentially unsuccessful for you? And I would just ask if you're welcome to also share about sort of specific unsuccessful experiences that you had, but let's, we're not here to shame anybody. So let's sort of keep those stories anonymous in terms of what theater that might have been, but it's definitely helpful information to know about both successful and unsuccessful experiences that you've had seeing theater. So whoever wants to kick us off. Yeah, Frank.
Yes, this is Frank. I'd like to return to Krystal's comment about finding accessibility, about being able to call and have a conversation with the theater, what kind of access is being supplied, and asking these questions. I feel that's very important because what she's looking for is a successful experience, and so am I. And I want to emphasize that what is a successful experience really is returning to audience development, because that's a critical issue for the theater. You really want to build your audience. You want to build your clientele. You want to build your community. And how you as a theater company are giving back to a community by providing access. Yes, but let's talk about the quality of access. Quality of access is very important as well. For me, going to interpreted theater, it's not like you can just find any old interpreter off the street and plump them down in front of an audience and have them interpret a show. In my opinion, that's not the secret of success. You need to ask yourselves why you're providing the access in the first place. What is your reason? Are you just trying to meet a quota? Are you ticking it off the list? Are you adhering to a federal requirement? Or is it coming from your heart that you're actually trying to build a community, and that's why you're engaging the right interpreters for the show? So you need to ask yourselves why you're putting an interpreter in that position. For me, a successful experience is the sense of community, because deaf people, well, let me just come back to this. Imagine once a month, you've got a calendar that you know that this interpreted event is going to be happening at XYZ Theater. And imagine all the deaf people in the community coming together and being able to do that because of this interpreting event. They're able to meet each other before the show, maybe get out some dinner together, see the show together, maybe go out for a couple of coffees or something together after the show. That is a successful experience for me. And it's very important that you have a middle person. Krystal was looking to find someone to contact to get the information, but many people need someone who can be the facilitator, who can hold the community and understand what they can do for us. It might be even providing workshops, or it could be that the theater has panel discussions after the show, and they're scheduled during the interpreted shows so that the ASL using community can be part of that. Or maybe there's a pre-show discussion or light refreshments where individuals can have an opportunity to watch a presentation about the play, maybe from the theater department, why it was selected, and give the audience knowledgeable. Deaf people definitely want to be participants in that as well. So it's really a kind of a hard question to ask yourselves, why are you doing that? For me, the least preferable experience is merely open caption. And I'm not saying that it's because English is my second language, not at all. But unfortunately for me, it's often about the placement of captions. When I'm seated and the captions are on the far right of the house and the actors are center stage, and then you're asking me to swivel my head back and forth between the captions, between the actors, it's like I'm watching a Wimbledon tennis match, right? Ping-ponging my way between the captions and the actors. So you're forcing me to look somewhere else for the linguistic access and look on stage for the visual and theater access, and it doesn't make sense to me. There was a theater company whose name I won't mention, who finally actually put the captions dead center of the stage, right there. And there were several people making complimentary statements that they appreciated so much. So then I wonder, why hadn't it been done? Was it the fear of minimizing a show's value and having captions become an eyesore, or that the hearing audience is too sensitive to it, so they're going to have to remove the captions as far away from their perspective as possible. So, and sometimes it's not just about the interpreter or about the captions, but about them upstaging the show at all. It's actually about the theater company upstaging the entire experience. And this is what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Frank, for sharing that. This is Kirsten. I want to give us a minute because I think we lost some of the spotlights of the other panelists. So I'll just pause for a second to bring them back on before we continue. Great. All right. Everybody's back. Yeah, so Frank, I definitely want to return to what you were talking about theaters building community. But before we get into that, I also want to hear from Krystal and Tina about what a successful or unsuccessful experience looks like for you at the theater.
This is Krystal. Well, I can say recently I attended a play called The Jagged Little Pill, and I loved it. Oh man, I loved it so much. But I really wish that there was some type of ADA accommodation other than putting me in the first row of the theater. And reason being because it doesn't really matter where I sit in the theater. I'm still not able to see every detail. At most, I might know when people are walking across, or if they're doing some fast movement or some kind of dancing movement based on the way that their body is moving. So I was wishing that, maybe an audio description device could have been there. But it still didn't take away from how great that show was. It really was great. But I was in the very front row, and it just seemed like too much for me because of a few things. The bass in the musical production, it was just like shaking my body. And just not knowing exactly what was happening on the stage. But I can say that because it was such a well-written play and the actors that were there were so great, it didn't lose its quality all the way from me because I could still follow along from scene to scene, but it just would have added something even better if there was some type of ADA accommodation other than sitting in the very front row of the theater. And in another instance where I had a successful ADA experience, the Big Apple Circus, they had a dining in the dark event where they invited about 20 plus visually impaired and blind people. And they asked us to invite anyone that was sighted, whether it's a friend or family member, so that they can kind of get a little bit of an idea of what it's like to be in our shoes with restricted vision or no vision. And they were blindfolded. There were guides. The attendants were guides who were kind of like giving us orientation around the dining hall and even the performance space. And we had a chance to do a touch tour to touch the costumes and meet and greet with a couple of the actors. Now I know that won't happen at all performances. That might just be too much. But it really added that sensitivity to the whole idea of connecting with the visually impaired community and making sure that we were socially engaged and that we were having that equal access of entertainment, and just knowing that it was actually an inclusive space. So that really made it great. And then once the circus actually began, another company, they were doing live audio description. So, there's different types of audio description, but their live audio description, they put their own personalities into it. So it was like a personalized audio described event. And it just was really a great experience. So I really wish that most theaters or venues that offer performing arts of any kind, that they would seek out their customers who have different disabilities to have different ADA committees, so that one, not just so that they could just have it as like a placeholder to say that they have it, but to also stay up to date with the trends of where technology is evolving, and even how the trends of ADA accommodations continue to evolve. I think that would allow for more of an enjoyable and inclusive experience for everyone who might have a particular need.
Yeah, thank you, Krystal. Tina, you have anything you want to add?
Yeah. So for me, so I apologize. I have all of these notes because I tend to like go off sometimes. So I wanted to make sure to be very deliberate in the things that I'm saying. So for me, I have seen shows all over the country. So I have had the opportunity to experience a bunch of different access services and the way that they're implemented. And for me, my gold standard really is when I see a show in Chicago with a Broadway in Chicago series. And so they have a dedicated accessibility staff person. So like what Frank was talking about, you can contact them through email, which I think is great. They're not saying, hey, deaf person, call me on the phone to, arrange for accessibility. And the great thing about that is then we can walk through the best seating. So they have dedicated accessible seating for Broadway and Chicago shows. So we are in the first 20 rows. We are stage right a little bit, but I can pick seats that are closer to the middle so that I can see the center of the stage. There have been shows where they suggest that I sit way like house right. And I've learned that in certain venues, when that happens, like Frank was saying, you miss half of the stage. So I appreciate that I can have that dialogue with them and actually pick where I want to sit. There's also a staff person on site during the production. And so before the show even starts, they make sure that I don't have like a really tall person sitting in front of me, cutting off my line of sight to the captioning or to the ASL interpreters, if that's what I'm looking for. And I would say very, very importantly, they are also soliciting audience feedback. So there is a feedback form that I can fill out that will let them know what works and what doesn't work. And I feel like if theaters don't get that feedback, how are they going to know what things worked and what things did not work? So I think that's a very important component to when you are providing services. They have several dates and times for seeing a show where they list out which are the sign interpreted shows, which ones are open caption, which ones have audio description. And the other thing is if that specific date does not work with my schedule, it takes me about a little over 2 hours to get from where I live to downtown Chicago to go see a show. If that date and time doesn't work, they have been very, very flexible about trying to find an alternate date, which I really, really appreciate, instead of making me go in the middle of the week on a Wednesday night, which is impossible. And last but not least, I am not penalized because I have to sit close to be able to access an interpreter or captioning. I know that for some people, so like Krystal, when you were talking about having to sit in the front row, I don't know if they made you pay for that premium seat to sit in that front row. And, I don't think that we should be penalized for that. So I think that's very important. So an unsuccessful experience for me is when a venue tried to tell me what they would offer. And that's what happens. If we, the consumer, if we don't have our elevator speech, or if we don't know what works best for us, then people will make the decision for us. And so it's really important to advocate for yourself and let them know what works best. There was also only one date available. Emails went up the chain until finally they're like, fine, we'll provide it, but it was not pretty. It was inappropriate captioning, and it was ineffective. So they actually it was a musical, and they actually had like a cart reporter, like what we have here, the stenographer listening to the conversation and putting up the captions. And that's not appropriate for something that's pre-scripted, like a musical. And so it was really, really bad. And so I ended up, wasting a whole day of travel because this was at a venue that was about 3 hours away. I sat through a show that I could not enjoy. My family was able to kind of enjoy it, but kind of not, because they knew that I was not able to enjoy it. And we'd been planning this trip for months. And so it was a really big disappointment. They did offer me comp tickets, but the performance was a week later, and I couldn't take the time to rearrange my schedule to then make that performance. And I would have had to go alone. So it really, was not really good. So I also want to let you all know that in terms of like some words of advice for situations like this, and I don't have the answer for this because it really depends on the venue and your resources, but think about, what is your plan B? What will happen if the access services don't work, if an interpreter becomes sick, if the captioning, is not working, the equipment isn't working, because that happens, right? And so how are you going to kind of reconcile that with your patron? Sometimes you have no choice but to offer a comp ticket or something like that. And of course, maybe double or triple checking that everything is in place before the show even happens is probably the best advice that I could give you for that situation. And so that's what I wanted to offer.
This is Kirsten. Thank you, Tina. And thank you, all of you. It feels very much like there's a very strong through line, I think, between all of your answers, in terms of like what makes this a successful experience is, an attention to individual needs and like accommodating people, meeting them where they are, not assuming like a one size fits all, and also like going above the bare minimum. And like Frank was talking about, like really engaging community and understanding that this is, trust and engagement has to be built with these communities who have often been sort of burnt by theater going, and that it can take a little bit more work and sort of creative solutions to create an exciting experience for people. I'm curious, this isn't one of our pre-written questions, but your answers just kind of got me thinking. I wonder if each of you wouldn't mind sort of sharing what your ideal theater going experience would be. So like blue skies, dream big, from the like buying the ticket all the way through curtain call of the show. What would be your perfect theater going experience? Yeah, Tina, you can start.
So my answer is kind of short and sweet. It's what I get in Chicago. I really feel like they do everything right. They meet my schedule, they provide the accommodations that I request, they make it easy to get tickets. We have set aside seating, all of that. So that's my answer.
Love it. Short and sweet. Thank you. Frank.
This is Frank. Yeah, perfect theater night would be go see a play that's already cast. That's the main reason I would go, with the original cast. Plus, it would have to have a wonderful team of interpreters. That's the most important thing for me. And there are times on Broadway that have had, there have been shows that I've wanted to see, and they don't necessarily provide access. And there have been great casts. The original casts have been wonderful, and I've wanted to see them. And that's unfortunate. But, that's one of those, that's life things. But I also feel like sometimes I have to wait for the hype to die down a little bit about a brand new show. And then there's replacements that get put into the show, and maybe sales aren't doing as well. And then they'll have an interpreted show. Now that there's replacements, maybe it's, later on. So I'm not interested anymore because I really wanted to see that original cast. I want to be in the now. I don't want to be a second thought later. Because, maybe that's because of my theater background. I want to see their work. I want, the philosophy, what they're offering. They picked that original cast for a reason. So I want to be part of that. But, sometimes that doesn't happen. I'm sure many of you sometimes are overwhelmed. Theater companies are like, where do I start? I would say start small and build from there. It's super important to know who your stakeholders are. Ask the people in the community. Ask deaf people what their thoughts are. What do they want? How to reach out to the community. Ask your stakeholders. Make them part of that conversation. Don't assume that you set it up and it's going to be perfect. I mean, there could be some backlash later because you didn't ask all those questions. So I would strongly suggest perfect would be getting those stakeholders involved at the beginning.
Great. Thank you, Frank. Krystal, would you like to share?
Yes. I guess a perfect experience for me would include if I wanted to purchase tickets online, that any seating that might be identified for ADA related customers, it would be something that I could actually purchase online myself with the assistive technology that I use, versus me having to probably ask someone or try to call the theater and go through the box office and have to wait. Maybe just having that access online first. A great description about what the summary of the performance will be. And once attending, if there are attendants that will be kind of like assisting the audience members to go in the showroom, if I'm there and they notice that I'm blind because I'm using a mobility cane, just greeting me just like the other guests, not feeling like they have to drag me by my arm or pull me, or, maybe that the attendant would be familiar with what sighted guide is, because that is a walking technique for visually impaired people who are being guided by someone who's fully sighted. And once being seated, having access to some working audio descriptive devices, because there are some places that will say they have audio descriptive devices, and then they'll be giving me a device that's for someone who might be deaf or hard of hearing. And sometimes I will have to say, well, these are two different disabilities. Sometimes they can meet each other, but I'm visually impaired, so I need an audio descriptive device. So if there was one that was actually working, because there's been many times that I've attended performances and they may not have been functioning, or maybe the staff wouldn't even know how they operate. So that, and just having those access options to choose from. And if technology isn't functioning, at least the staff members would have that awareness about how to engage with someone like myself.
Yeah, Tina, go right ahead.
So Krystal, kind of adding to what you're talking about with non-functioning equipment, this is something that I do when I actually go to get a captioning device to watch a movie. First, I usually grab 2 devices. I make sure that they check the devices at the desk, before I go walk to the theater. But having 2 devices gives me a backup. The third thing that I do is I ask them to send a staff person with me to the theater. And when the movie starts and the captions are supposed to come on, I give the staff member a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and they're watching me, right? And the reason that I have them come to the theater is because that way they can run back and forth trying to figure out what's going wrong instead of me missing the first 15 minutes of the movie. Mm-hmm. So, it's also just really important that the house staff checks the equipment periodically, like building that into your schedule. Like, every month we're going to do a listening check on all of the equipment, make sure the batteries are corroded, that, the cords aren't frayed and things like that. So again, that's part of that front end kind of planning. But for me, I pretty much assume that equipment is not going to work. And so I always try to have a plan B. I think being an audiologist and dealing with technology all day, every day, I just, that's just my life. So that's how I kind of deal with things.
Frank, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd love to add to that, but what Krystal and Tina just said. My experience has been very similar. And I remember seeing a show on Broadway, The Book of Mormon. They gave me a device, and there were 2 things wrong with it. There was a huge delay. There would be a funny joke and everyone's laughing, and I'm waiting 30 seconds later. I got the information. That was the first thing. The second thing was the captioning itself would turn off in the middle of the play, would just be gone. And I'd be struggling to put it back on and then wondering, should I just get up now and walk out of the theater and take care of my needs? Or should I just sit here and wait for them to come to me and change it? It was a real struggle. And like Tina, you said very nicely that you say they should check the equipment every month. I would say every week, that it should be built into the schedule weekly. That's the part of their responsibility. Why say you're providing things in the first place if you're not going to keep up with them and check them? That's their responsibility. It's on them. You can't let people assume everything is fine. The people that work there, they can't assume everything is fine. But at the same time, it's kind of like our responsibility to let them know what their job is and how to do it right. And that if you're seeing a show and there's a 3-hour commitment there and you want it to be successful, and like you said, if you have to drive a distance and then go back home for nothing, no, that's not good. That's on them. It's their responsibility.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
go ahead, Krystal.
I'm sorry, just really quick. I also wanted to add to what Tina mentioned, and thank you for those suggestions, Tina. I just really think that some of the CEOs and directors of these playhouses or performance arts facilities, maybe along with the checking of the devices, those CEOs and those directors, they should have that time to kind of experience the event like the consumer with the disability. So as soon as they get whatever play or whatever movie release, so that they can be able to market it out to customers before they even do that, to be able to, like, this would be ideal. I don't know, it would probably be a long shot, but just to be able to have them experience it as somebody who might be a wheelchair user, from before they even get into the venue, how they could, you know, get into the facility, to how they navigate through the facility, or for someone who might be visually impaired, them using sleep shades, and not just totally blacked out sleep shades, but sleep shades that might represent different eye conditions, so that they could experience the movie or the play as the person with the vision impairment who doesn't have the access that another customer without any disability. So that maybe, you know, through that type of assessment, that role play assessment, they'll be able to add to any of their ADA accommodations or even start an ADA plan. I just think all of these theaters really should have some type of ADA theater plan. And if they have an existing one, to continuously update it. And the staff and the people who make the decisions should be kind of like in some type of in-service training, where they're experiencing it as a assimilation to someone who might have a disability, just so that they can get that sensitivity experience, and also to make sure that they are checking off all of the areas that can allow an equal access experience for their customers. Because, you know, we're out, we're doing things, we're patronizing the arts, and we should be able to have that equal experience.
Yeah, exactly, Krystal. Thank you. This is Kirsten. And thank you, all of you, for all of those really great insights. And I think, you know, Krystal, you make a really good point about getting, you know, people who are running theater companies to really understand this, because, you know, having buy-in across the organization, and especially at sort of the highest levels of leadership, to understand A, that accessibility is important, and B, like all of the very real work that goes into like making things actually accessible is really important in order for theaters to sort of prioritize that. And yeah, I think even better than, you know, I think, you know, you as theater staff, folks who are watching these, should definitely, you know, take the time to try to understand for yourselves what the experiences of disabled patrons are going to see your shows, but also, you know, pay some disabled people to come in and tell you themselves what their experiences are. I think that will get you the best kind of feedback you can get. Yeah, Tina, go ahead.
So I think, like, when I think about like a perfect world, I would love to be able to, and Krystal, what I'm doing right now is I'm licking my finger and I'm holding up my pointer finger like I'm gauging the wind, okay? And so I would love to be able to very last minute just pick any show at any venue and have access, you know, like immediately. But we know that that's not the case. I also acknowledge that I don't want theaters to provide access, like Frank was alluding to earlier, to make a quota, or to just, you know, kind of like performance, you know, advocacy, you know, and they're not really invested in the community, or providing the wrong accessibility for a performance. And so I think especially for the more local theaters that kind of cater to their local community, have a focus group, you know, ask them, you know, which accessibility service do you prefer? Because, you know, for some groups where there's a large signing deaf population, it may be an ASL interpreter. Where you're in a retirement community where there's a lot of more late deafened people where spoken English is their first language, they may prefer captions. Or, you know, they have hearing aids or cochlear implants and they want a hearing loop. it's really important to ask the patrons, again, getting that feedback. And it really does come down to data. Also, I think as organizations that it will be easier for you to justify asking for money in the budget for accessibility if you have hard numbers. And also planning for accessibility on the front end and building it into your budget. So being proactive as opposed to scrambling in a reactive manner when someone makes a request. And the worst that can happen when you pre-plan and budget for accessibility, the worst that can happen is you don't use that money. And then you just move that line item on to the next year, and you can use the money that way. But I think it's really important that, like Frank was saying, talk to the stakeholders, find out what works best for them.
Yeah, this is Kirsten. I love that, Tina. Frank, go ahead.
Yes, this is Frank. I would like to just share a situation to help you who are providing access be a little more savvy. There are some theaters that provide shows for younger audiences, offering school day performances. I see them out there. So, for example, there are some Broadway shows that have younger audiences, and many school children attend those performances. And I know that upcoming is the Scottish play, Macbeth, on Broadway, and they are inviting school attendees, and I want to see it, but I'm not a student in my school, which means I can't just go with them. But if theaters were playing it smart, if they were showing that accessible show in the afternoon, why not also have an evening performance? You wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel by rescheduling interpreters at another date. If you've got interpreters for a student accessed show, why not use the same team for that evening? So you can really be successful if you plan it well. This is something I try to share. For whatever reason, it didn't work with the Scottish Plays production company. But this is something really for y'all to think about. Think about providing shows for younger audiences, and then an older audience might also have the same interest in that show. So think how that could be developed. And this way, you're actually developing more audiences, not just the younger audiences, but your more mature audiences as well, and they're going to work hand in hand. So I just wanted to plant that seed.
Yeah, this is Kirsten. I think that's a really great point, Frank. Working smarter, not harder in getting these access services provided. If you can do 2 in one day, do 2 in one day. And I think that's a great way to save time, energy, money, all of that.
Yeah.
I want to ask a question.
And I'm sorry, Kirsten, this is just me, Frank, again. I'm just reinforcing the idea of planning ahead and putting in the logistical assessment of what your goals are.
Absolutely, for sure. So I'm curious to know, we've talked about things that theaters have done well, that theaters haven't done as well. I'm curious, how have theaters in the past, or how would you like theaters to build trust with you as an audience member? Because you are putting a lot of trust into a theater's hands, into these access service providers' hands, whether they be ASL interpreters or audio describers or whatever. And how do these people that are taking part in providing this accessible performance how can they build trust with you to make you feel confident that you'll be going to a show where you'll have a good experience? Yeah, Tina.
So if a venue takes the time to ask for my input before a performance, and feedback after a performance, I'm going to think and hope that they're going to use that information to improve services, especially if there were problems. I trust venues that have or that post on their website what services are available and what they are. And you're right, you know, like there's some people that they don't know what they don't know. And so hopefully you might be doing some education also for some of these patrons. So for example, I see in the chat box right now that someone has a question about, you know, what does interpreter services look like? You know, trying to maybe come up with some language, maybe a description of what's happening when you are using these different access services. And I trust venues that don't make me feel like a burden or a villain when I request services. So if I'm unfamiliar with a certain venue, I can pretty much tell how they're gonna, how the access services are gonna be just by that first interaction. Like, is it really, really difficult? Do they not know what they're doing? Well, then I'm not going to have trust that they're going to be providing the appropriate services. So there's so much truth in you never have a second chance to make a first impression. So think about what you want that first impression to be. Do you want to be welcoming? Do you want to be inclusive? And how are you going to show that? So that's how I figure out how I'm going to trust a venue. And that also applies to service providers. You know, I have for sure, definitely some favorite interpreters and favorite captioners that I know what they're doing and they're doing a good job. So for example, that Unsuccessful experience that I talked about, the theater didn't even know that there were captioners experienced in captioning shows. And I tried to find out that information before I went to the performance, and I was getting major pushback. And so I kind of went into the situation kind of expecting it not to go great. You know, I was still disappointed. I was still also hopeful that it was going to be good, but you can tell.
This is Krystal. Well, a venue that would forge some trust for me, I feel like, for instance, if purchasing tickets online before checking out, maybe having a question, do you require any ADA accommodations? So that maybe the staff could have that advance notice in preparing for whenever the selected date is. Maybe even seeing some staff members who are people from the disability community. Just knowing, because recently I started going out with a friend to different places at night, and he's deaf blind. He's partially deaf and partially blind, and he thought that because he started losing his vision, that his entertainment at night would stop because of his new vision loss. And so by going out with him, he's still a work in progress. He doesn't use his mobility cane, but maybe going to a venue where seeing someone else who's visually impaired, maybe greeting or working behind the ticket desk or whatever, that would encourage other people who might not be so comfortable with their disability to kind of increase their comfort level with just using their own mobility devices, and knowing that when they go to different venues, it's a safe space for them. There's been times when I've been at venues, and if I made a mistake and bumped into something because I didn't see it or my cane didn't touch it, a staff person thought that I was inebriated. And I'm like, no, I'm visually impaired. And then they didn't know what that meant. So maybe knowing that staff members understand the language that is associated with the disability community, what each disability represents and what it's comprised of, because that can avoid a lot of different awkward situations. And then just knowing that it is a welcoming space, like Tina mentioned, having those focus groups, maybe the ADA committees, knowing that that's available. Their marketing on TV ads or radio ads, you know, saying that some type of statement that is inviting for customers who have different specific needs. That would help me build my trust. Or if it's a commercial ad, whether it's on an app or on television, having that voiceover so that I would know that what's happening in the commercial, and knowing that they even consider something like audio description or voiceover features. So that would kind of build my trust.
This is Frank. I'd like to offer a quote. If you build it, they will come. So we're talking about if you're building something that engenders trust. But I want to go back to my college years. I was a student at Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. I majored in theater. And there were many local theaters that are well respected. The Arena Stage in DC, for example, they're fantastic theater companies. And they have what they called subscription seats. So I decided to join as a subscriber because I was a theater major. And it was one of my requirements to attend as much theater as possible. So I was a subscriber, and each quarter they had a show I would attend, and I saw their process of audience development. They'd advertise, they'd bring the audience, they'd be greeted, a deaf audience, so that ushers were saying, "Nice to see you again," in sign language, so that new faces became familiar and they became regular parts of members of the theater community. So that when the event ended, it was not required, but there was also a small reception where perhaps a couple of the actors from the company would come out. I had such a wonderful opportunity and the honor of meeting Ruby Dee, who was a lead in one of their shows. I had a great conversation, very short and sweet, but she was such a wonderful person. And I met several of the other pretty well-known celebrities. So making these kind of arrangements engenders trust, most definitely. And then seeing the same faces repeatedly, that's community building right there. And we have that here in New York as well. And this just is what reminded me of my youth, and I'm very happy to see this occurring these days. Deaf people are a marginalized group, meaning that we are out of the mainstream because our communication is different. And with sign language, of course, we're going to be in the signing group, but that's why I say if you build it, they will come. It's important to recognize that deaf people's language is different. It's nothing personal, just the way it is. And that if you want to provide access, you're going to have to really do the work of thinking about what that means, what you want to bring, what's the purpose, why are you offering this to the community? For example, there are other persons who have taken the lead in interpreting some shows who are more in the avant-garde world, more of dance or abstract theater, which is absolutely fine. But would I feel comfortable in going without knowing who those people are? And if I were to attend, what would I be seeing? Would I know the people who are also in attendance? I have no idea. And yet these companies, avant companies, are advertising for us to come, and I'm happy to see it. And yet at the same time, I'm just not sure who is there and why am I feeling this little sense of insecurity. So I'm wondering, do I need to reflect on it? I mean, I definitely want to support the arts as much as possible. And I support having interpreted theater. I support having access. But at the same time, it's also about me. Why am I not going? Is it because I don't feel safe? This is a big question for me to consider. And it would be a good question for you to think about. Again, what is the company doing to make me feel safe enough to attend your show?
Definitely. This is Kirsten. Really great things to think about. We have about 12 minutes left, and I want to make sure we at least have time for a couple of audience questions. So for folks in attendance, if you have questions for our panelists today, you can either type them in the chat, or if you'd like to speak them out loud, you can just use the Zoom raise hand feature to indicate that you'd like to speak. Just note, because we are recording, if you do choose to speak out loud, you will be on the recording. And I do see a couple of questions in the chat from Tucker and from David. I'm going to start with Tucker, and Tucker, I'm not totally sure on what you're asking here, so I wonder if you would mind either coming on mic or just typing in the chat to elaborate so I can make sure that we're getting the right answer to your question.
Okay.
Great.
So, I launched with children. I want to know how do you approach the topic with interpreting?
So Tucker, you're asking how you approach the topic of interpreting. Are you asking how you approach that topic with like other hearing audience members who are in attendance, or approach it with who? That's what I'm not clear on.
Well, like we had a situation in our event that my boss asked about it, and it was inappropriate to ask the interpreter. So I just want to find a way to not cross any boundaries.
Okay, so you had a situation at an event where someone sort of tried to ask a question of an interpreter, and that felt like sort of inappropriate or like it was crossing a boundary. And so you want to figure out how to avoid those situations in the future. Is that accurate?
Yeah. But we are interested in learning the process of interpreting.
So you're interested in learning the process of interpreting.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I'll certainly, Frank or Tina, if you have anything to add about like suggestions for working with interpreters, but Tucker, I'm sure Beth Prevor, who's here on the call with us, and I would definitely recommend, if you haven't already, connecting with Beth and with Hands On, which is her organization that does theatrical sign interpreting, for recommendations. Sorry, Beth, to sort of just throw your name out there, but she is a really great resource for learning how to
I just don't want to make a big picture about it. I just want to know for the future?
Yeah, so you don't want to make sort of like a big pitch. You just want to know information for the future, which is fine. I still think you can just sort of check in with Beth for info, even if you don't have necessarily an immediate plan for an interpreted show coming up in your future.
Okay.
Yeah, Frank or Tina, you have anything you want to share? Yeah, Tina, go ahead.
So just some tips. It's going to take preparation. I know from talking with interpreters that have interpreted shows, what's really helpful for them is having a script ahead of time so that they know what's going to be part of the show, as well as having an opportunity to watch the show during Tech Week or like invited dress or something like that, as opposed to going into a situation kind of cold interpreting and not knowing what's going to happen. So my suggestion for you is to make sure that, that you're connecting with the interpreters ahead of time, that they are experienced with interpreting for theater, and that you involve them in that creative process, especially during rehearsal.
Yeah, thank you, Tina.
Yeah, this is Frank. I can add really quickly to what Tina just said, just a quick comment. And Tina's right. There's typically interpreters and a director of artistic sign language, a DASL, and that's the person that works on the translation from to ASL, and they work week after week practicing to make it beautiful and artistic, not just in ASL, and they work together as much as possible, because the goal is to provide high quality. If the theater is high quality, you want the interpretation to match it. You don't want your interpretation to be a lesser quality of the actual show. You don't want that at all. So everything has to match. It's a big process. There's, it's very involved, but yeah. And those were good points, Tina.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing that. I do hope that with this conversation and beyond, we can get to a place where disabled audiences have the same amount of freedom and spontaneity as non-disabled audiences do, where, it doesn't, in an ideal world, I don't think you'd have to notify the box office in advance in order to show up and have the performance be accessible to you, unless of course you want a super personalized experience like some of our folks were talking about earlier. And so I think there's sort of a balance to be struck here. And I think something interesting, because I know that so many of Art New York's members in particular don't own their own space and are renting, are hopping around from theater to theater. What would it look like if your theater company, when, writing up a contract with a venue, had an accessibility rider, said, we will not produce at your venue unless you, include XYZ things, unless you check your, assistive listening devices before our production so that that they're working, sort of things like that. And so I think I know that so many small theaters sort of lack that agency in having their own venue. I wonder what sort of creative forms of allyship and advocacy organizations like that can do to help push venues that can sometimes be a little slower and less nimble to get on board with all of this stuff. Yeah, Tina, go ahead.
So I'm going to put in, I know we're out of time, a quick plug for the Kennedy Center's Leadership Exchange in Arts and Disability Conference that's coming up in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's August 1st through 5th. And it is a great place to network and connect with other theaters that are in similar situations, the smaller theaters. It's a great time to talk about what worked outside the box for situations just like that. And so, Art New York is also great for things like that. But if you want like a broader scope, maybe of theaters around the country, that's a great place. So for people that don't know about that conference, it's a really great event.
Thank you, Tina. And I just dropped the link to the LEAD conference in the chat for anyone who is interested in learning more. Great. Yes, we are out of time. Thank you so much to these panelists. I don't know, Ash, if you're still here, if you want to come back on to sign us out. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Thank you all so much. This was such a fruitful and full conversation. And it just so happens that it happened on April 6th, which is National Assistive Technology Awareness Day. Thank you, Krystal, for letting me know that yesterday. And I was like, wow, how serendipitous. So thank you all so very much. And I hope you all have a great day. Thank you, Kirsten, for moderating. Frank, Tina, Krystal, to our interpreters, our captioner, thank you all, and happy Wednesday.